Hello, and welcome to the fanfic reread project. Basically what this is kind of what it says on the tin. I am going to read through a bunch of my old fan fictions and talk about them to you guys. I wanted to show the progression of my writing throughout the years, starting with like my oldest fanfics, which we are going to be reading today, all the way up to drafts from like 2-ish years ago, to show how my writing has changed and morphed over time. I just thought it might be interesting, especially like I guess if you're interested in my writing, thanks also, but like if to see where I started and where I ended up. So the bulk of this will concern unpublished and usually unfinished stories that I've written over the years. Most of my actual quote-unquote published, as in it's on the internet and you can go read it right now, stuff is not going to be in there, but some of it is. Because there are a few stories in here that are either, they either have drafts in here, such as like Keep Breathing. We are going to be reading that sometime down the line so you can compare and contrast it with its earlier drafts. Or in the case of like Curse of the Black Pearl, my Pirates of the Caribbean fanfic, its sequel is in here because that's not being put out. I figured it'd be nice to give you context by reading the story that came before it. And I think the other two that we're going to read are Captain America and The Fall, because the midquel that originally happened between those two stories, River, is being read here. So again, it's nice to have that context so you kind of understand what gap that's supposed to be bridging. On the other hand, there are some published stories that will not be included because they don't have drafts, so there's really no point in getting into it. So anyway, to get to the story that we're going to be reading today, we are going to start this with what I consider to be my first proper quote-unquote attempt at fanfic. This is the first fanfic I wrote after sort of a self-imposed fanfiction like exile. And it is the first story that I wrote in my current quote-unquote writing journey. So from this point forward, I've been writing pretty consistently since this. And this story is a Hunger Games fanfic that I called The Tribute from District 12. That title is actually an unused title from the Hunger Games. And I just used it for my story because I needed a title for the story on NaNoWriMo. So yeah, I started writing this for NaNoWriMo 2012. It literally was the first time I was writing and attempting an actual like story after not having really like written any prose in I think like 2 years. So now that you know what this is and you know what we're going into, let's jump right in with chapter 1. My eyes jolt open in the morning. I'm alone. Prim should be in the bed with me. She almost always was. After a moment, I realize that she's just in my mother's bed, and that's all. On any other day, this wouldn't even be an issue. She usually crawled into my mother's bed when she had nightmares, but today is the reaping. Even just the thought of not knowing where she is scares me, even in my dreams. I get out of bed and slide into my hunting clothes, a rough spun shirt and worn suede pants. I slip on my boots and put my hair in a braid as I move towards the kitchen. There's a small piece of cheese on the table wrapped in basil leaves, a gift from Prim. I pocket it and head out the door. So, this is something that you were going to see a little bit throughout this series, because I've actually gone ahead and recorded some future episodes of this, because my original recording of this series, it's kind of convoluted, but essentially speaking, I got to a point where I kept trying to do this one story as well as its later edit from a few, like 2 years later. I kept trying to record these things and I just got to a point where I was fucking sick of it. So I went ahead and recorded the next like 4 or 5 series after this because I was just like, I need to get away from this. So this is the first time I'm looking at this story in a few months actually, because I just got so fucking tired of it, but now I can stand to read it again. However, like I said, in future episodes, you are going to notice that sometimes I go off on tangents wondering things about like the world building or just certain little details that I put into the story, and I'm just like, well, why did I do that? Because I was looking at like the material that she said her pants were made out of, and I was wondering like, does it really make sense for her to have suede pants? And then I was like, well, is that something that someone could catch and then make? To be honest, I'm just overthinking details right now. I probably copied that out of the book and didn't think about it. To be honest, I'm pretty sure suede is made out of just some type of animal skin, like deer or something like that. And there are deer in District 12, it doesn't matter. Anyway, the sun hasn't risen fully yet, but it's still light out. The sky is completely clear. It's unusually quiet for this hour. On a normal day, the coal workers would be heading to the mines, but not today. The reaping is a national holiday, and it doesn't truly begin until afternoon. It's the only day they can sleep in. I'm realizing right away that this story has a lot of really short sentences. This is unique for two reasons. Number one, because it contrasts with the way I write today, where I try to consciously alternate between short sentences and long sentences to give it like a good rhythm. Because if you have too many short sentences, it starts to feel choppy, but if you had too many long sentences, you have a hard time reading it because you especially if you're reading out loud, because you start to run out of breath. It's just exhausting and confusing too. Number two, it also contrasts with some of the writing that I did directly after this. I wrote with way longer sentences, basically. So there were I somehow went from all of these short sentences copying Suzanne Collins to writing the longest sentences ever. In Batman Begins, there is a chapter where there is a paragraph that is literally 3 sentences long, but if you were to look at it in the document, it still takes up a solid 4 lines. So we somehow went from I wake up in the morning, I'm alone, where's Prim, to no commas. It's amazing, to be honest. I reached the perimeter gate quickly. We live on the edge of the seam on the western side of the district. The gate is the only thing separating us from the forest. It should be a perimeter fence, not a perimeter gate. That's weird. It's supposed to protect us from the predators that roam the forest and beyond, but the thing is filled with holes. It's meant to be electrified too, but we only get a few hours of electricity at night. They say that wild dogs used to roam the streets at... What? They say that wild dogs used to roam the streets at night, I think that's supposed to say. They say that wild dogs used to roam the streets at night before they put it up, so I guess it does its job well enough. In truth, I think it was meant more for keeping us in rather than keeping them out, but who knows. So that paragraph, on the other hand, kind of does a 180 and has lengthier sentences. It kind of goes back and forth. This observation is mostly interesting because, as I said, I'm not really recording these in order, so I've been jumping back and forth between stories written at different points within a, year and, 5-ish month period. So, I just finished a story that I finished writing in May of 2013, and now we're jumping back to something that I wrote in November of 2012. And then before that story, I actually finished a draft of a story that I didn't ever actually finish, but was writing roughly at the same-ish time as the other one, but I think I kind of also got into it later because it's better written. So I'm kind of all back and forth, and it is just interesting to see the differences in the writing between them. I crawl under one of the holes at the bottom of the fence and grab my bow and arrows from an old hollow log. Once you cross the fence, you're in the predator's domain. There are very few hunters in our district, partially because it's illegal and partially because it's so dangerous. But food is hard to come by, especially in the seam, so if you know how, you ought to do it. Those are 3 separate sentences, which is especially weird because but food is hard to come by, especially in the seam, so if you know how, you ought to do it. That feels like it should be 1 sentence. I'd never say that, wow. My bow is a rarity as it is. My father handmade it himself, along with the other I have hidden in another part of the woods. They're well made, and he could have made good money if he sold them. Why did you have to repeat the word made that many times? But the government would have had his neck if they found out. The peacekeepers ignore the few of us that hunt. They're as hungry as we are, but they jump at the thought of us having weapons inside the fence. I pass through the trees to the hills. Gale is waiting for me in our spot, the highest hill, overlooking the valley. "Hey, Catnip," he says. When he first asked me my name, I said it in a low whisper and he barely heard me. I said Katniss, he heard Catnip. He's been calling me that ever since. As I sit down next to him, he holds up a loaf of bread with an arrow through it. It's bakery made. "Nice shot," I say as he removes it. "What did it cost you?" "Just a squirrel. I think the old man was feeling sentimental this morning. He even wished me good luck. We all feel a little closer today, don't we?" He rolls his eyes and I laugh. I pull the cheese from my pocket. "Prim made it for us. We'll have a real feast." He mimics Effie Trinket, the woman from the Capitol who pulls the names at the reaping every year, putting on the Capitol accent. "I almost forgot. Happy Hunger Games." He breaks a corner of the bread off. "And may the odds." He tosses the piece in the air towards me. I catch it in my mouth and then finish his sentence. "Be ever in your favor." I laugh in earnest. Either of us could be carted off to our deaths this afternoon, but it's either this or being scared. This is more fun. Besides, when Capitol people try to speak our language, it's hilarious. Please pin that note of when capital people try to speak our language, because that's something I feel like we're going to talk about a little bit, especially in this beginning part of the story, because there's a lot of like confusion with what languages the people in the district speak, and number two, whether everyone in the country actually speaks the same language or not. Gale cuts the bread with his knife and hands me a slice. I spread the cheese on mine and place one of the leaves on top. The day feels perfect. The summer hasn't reached its peak and the sky is cloudless, and it would be perfect if this were a real holiday, if we had the whole day to ourselves. But instead we have to be in the square this afternoon, waiting to hear the names. He removes his jacket and reclines into the grass, resting his head on his arms. The sun shines on his skin, browned from days of hunting in the sun. We look a lot alike in that sense. We have the same black-brown hair, too. Most of the people in the scene look like this as well. Back when they formed Pan Am, they brought the miners from the rivers in the northwest. The original merchants came up from high in the western hills, so they look different. This is just notable, is because I corrected myself there when I said northwest. In the thing it says northeast, however, the location that I know I was referring to is northwest of where this story is supposed to take place. I get my directions mixed up. This is common throughout early stories, especially. When we get to Batman, you'll see. My mother used to run a small apothecary in the Merchants Square in the nicer part of the district, but her parents came from an island far to the north, past the edges of Pan Am itself in the northern sea. So that is 2 sentences, but it feels like it shouldn't be. Of course, if it was actually 1 sentence, I would hope it would be shorter, but still. Her pale skin and straw blonde hair look downright strange next to the merchants and the miners. Perm stands out even more, getting my mom's hair with my father's and my own skin. We both have our mother's eyes, light blue instead of my father's gray. Let's pause here and talk about where this takes place, because in the actual Hunger Games, you, through context clues, realize that it actually takes place in a far future version of North America. I think District 12 is roughly situated, like, whereabouts North Carolina or something like that. Like, it takes place, I think, not exactly in the Appalachian Mountains, but in the area close to that. But it's not, like, too far down south, and it's not up north either, so it's probably in the area of, like, Virginia and the Carolinas and stuff like that. However, this version of the Hunger Games is not set on Earth at all. For some reason that I still to this day do not entirely able to discern, I decided to set this story on the same planet as A Song of Ice and Fire. You may know it as the series of books that Game of Thrones is based off of. For reference, I did and still somewhat do have a Song of Ice and Fire fanfic that took place in this same version of the world. So while that story I think had happened in the past, this story was supposed to happen in the far future, something like that. So basically, Pan Am is on Essos, which is the eastern continent in that world. Specifically, it is in like south central-ish Essos, around the area where Valyria and Slaver's Bay and Lazar are, with some of the districts being up in the Dothraki Sea. There were a few that were closer to the western side of the continent. There were only like 2-ish, I think, that were over there, and I don't remember which ones they were. And then District 7 was in Cahor. So it's kind of centralized around there. So when she talks about the miners being from the rivers in the northwest, she's talking about the Rhoyne and its tributaries. The merchants came from high up in the western hills. Those are the Velvet Hills, which lie between Pentos and Bravos. At least I think that's what they're called. And then her mom's ancestors apparently are from Ib. Though that's weird because we learn multiple times that people from Ib can't actually reproduce with people from the continent. So I'm wondering how that worked, but I guess I just decided to ignore that. So let's keep going. Gale turns on his side towards me. We could do it, you know, he says quietly. Run off, live in the woods. We can make it. I sit quietly as I try to consider it. I can't really. Maybe if we didn't have so many kids, he says, chuckling quietly. He does everything quietly, doesn't he? We don't really have kids, but between his 3 siblings and my own sister, it feels like it. His mother can only do so much on her own, and my mother can't do much at all. We're the ones who put food on the table. What would they do without us? Okay, so Kat literally just said in an earlier paragraph that her mom used to run an apothecary in the Merchants Square. And then she's like, my mom can't do much at all. And it's like, something about that seems kind of off, doesn't it? But anyway, I never want to have kids of my own. I might, if we didn't live here. I feel a hand slide lightly up my thigh. Katniss said that first line and Gale said the second one, which I think is indicated by the line afterwards. But we do live here, I sigh out. He just looks at me. I take another bite of my bread and avoid his gaze. I don't want to have this conversation right now. Again. I change the subject. What do you want to do today? Let's fish at the lake and then we can gather in the woods. Get something nice for tonight. We're supposed to celebrate the reaping later tonight. The games are a national holiday even though it doesn't feel like it. The real reason to celebrate is if you don't get picked. I like how we just kind of don't talk about the part where he just kind of like suggestively lays a hand on her leg and she's like, no, thanks. That's a little bit different because that's something that does not happen in the book at all. We'll talk more about Gale and Katniss's relationship in this as we get deeper into it. We make a decent haul. 8 fish, a bag of greens, and a whole gallon of strawberries. We go by the Hob afterwards, the black market hidden in an old warehouse. We trade the fish for bread and salt, and Greasy Say takes half of our greens in exchange for a few blocks of wax. It's a bit much, but Say's the only one who will always buy a dog, so it's worth it to keep in good graces. Once it's in my soup, I call it beef, she'd always say. We finish at the market and then go to the mayor's back door. We'll sell half the strawberries to him. He loves them and he pays good. His daughter Madge comes to the door. She's the same age as me, and we're in the same class at school. We're friends because we don't talk to anyone else. She's wearing an expensive dress and a pink ribbon in her hair. Reaping clothes. Nice dress, Gale says. I can't tell if he's joking or not. Neither can she. She responds anyway. Well, if I go to the Capitol, I want to look nice, don't I? You're not going to the Capitol. You only have your name in, 5 times? I had mine in 6 when I was 12. He's eyeing a gold pin on her dress. It could keep us fed for months. That's not her fault, I say. It's no one's fault. Just the way it is. Madge avoids his gaze as she hands me the money. Good luck, Katniss. You too, I say as we leave. As much as I hate to admit it, Gale is right. You get your name put in at 12, and then once every year after that until you're 18. But then there's Tesserae. You can put in your name again in exchange for a ration of grain and oil. I had 4 slips my first year. 1 for my first year, really? 1 for my first year and 3 Tesserae for my mother, Prim, and I. I have 28. Gale has 42. He talks about it more in the woods. He says the Tesserae are a way to make the poor hate the rich. I see what he means now, but I also know that the complaining isn't going to change that. We split the wax, the greens, and the rest of the strawberries between us and head home. See you at the square, I say to him. He responds flatly, wear something pretty. This is something that I feel like I've never pointed out before when I've read this story, but the line where Katniss says, complaining is not going to change that feels kind of dismissive. I understand what she's saying because, yes, talking about it in the woods isn't going to change anything, but it's not like they can do anything to change that. They live under a dictatorship. So it feels like her just kind of being like, well, complaining's not going to do anything about it. It's like, well, what would you suggest, ma'am? But she's 16 years old, so I'm not going to dig into that. My mom and Prim are already dressed when I get home. Prim wears the outfit I wore to my first reaping, a white blouse and a blue skirt. Mom has it pinned in the back. It's a little big. My mother is wearing a dress from her days at the apothecary, white with blue flowers. I wash everything in the tub, even my hair. When I get out, I see that my mother has laid out a dress for me, a fine blue one made of satin. I'm surprised. Are you sure? I ask her. It feels like too much. Of course, she replies, and let's put your hair up too. I let her towel it dry and then twist it up on my head. I feel like a completely different person. You look beautiful, Prim whispers. I hug her. The reaping is always hard on her, but this year her name is in. I didn't let her take any Tesserae, so her name is only in once. The odds are in her favor. We head to the square when the sun is high in the sky. They direct the 12 through 18-year-olds to an area in the middle for check-in. Prim stops, nervous. It's okay, I say. It's just a little bit of blood. When you're 12, they prick your finger and press it onto a page in their book next to your name. I'm able to get her going again, and she does all right. I don't even flinch. Why did I have the character specify that they do this when you're 12 if then I was going to write her doing it too? That doesn't make any sense. The square gets more crowded as more people arrive. It's not big enough to hold everyone. They arrange us in groups, with the oldest in the front and the youngest in the back, girls on the right and boys on the left. The adults stand around the perimeter, separated from us by ropes. Anyone who can't fit is directed to the outside street. I focus my attention on the stage set up in front of the Justice Building. The microphone is in the middle, with 3 chairs behind it and a table with 2 large glass containers on the left. Mayor Undersea, Madge's father, is in one, and Effie Trinket, District 12's escort, is in another. She's a scary-looking woman with dyed white skin, curly white hair piled high on her head, and a burgundy suit that matches her lipstick and eyelashes too well. The seat next to her was empty. Why does that say was when this is written in present tense? Anyway. When the clock chimes, Effie gets up and stands at the microphone. "Happy Hunger Games, everyone," she says, "and may the odds be ever in your favor." She motions to a large projector screen to the side of the stage. "We have a little presentation for you straight from the Capitol." It's the same video every year. It tells the history of Panem, how the ancestors of the capital citizens sailed from an old city far on the western coast, and how they built the capital on a place that was once a grand kingdom. Then, how they conquered the entire eastern continent, creating the 13 districts. Sounds unrealistic, but alright. Then came the dark days, when the districts rebelled against the capital. 12 were defeated, and the 13th destroyed. They created the Treaty of Treason to ensure peace, and from that we got the Hunger Games. Each district provides one girl and one boy to participate. They're dropped in an arena, and over the course of a few weeks they fight to the death. The video is old, so Effie reminds us of the double victor rule, that if the last 2 tributes left alive are from the same district, they're both victors. They made it a permanent rule 4 years ago, as a reward for 70 years of good behavior. She then reads off a list of the past victors from our district. One is dead, and the other, Hamish Abernathy, isn't here. He's usually too drunk to walk straight, so it's a good thing. They won't laugh at us this year. Just a note, when it says like they made it a permanent rule, in here it says 10 years ago as a reward for 70 years good behavior, but we learn that it is still the 74th games. I don't know what happened there, but hey. She talks a bit more about what an honor it is to be here and how excited she is, though I know she wants very badly to be moved to one of the more exciting districts. Then it's time for the drawing. Effie moves across the stage to the first glass container. "Ladies first!" she shouts enthusiastically. I find Gale in the crowd and he gives me a faint smile. I want to return it, but my nerves won't let me. She walks back to the microphone and unfolds the slip of paper. She reads out the name. It's Primrose Everdeen. And that's the end of that chapter. This chapter is fine. My biggest thing is that the reason why this chapter is fine is because I wrote most of this story while having the book open in front of me as a quote-unquote guideline, which leads to moments of plagiarization, though I do know for a fact that I actually paraphrased a lot of what's happening. So it's not direct, like I'm taking Suzanne Collins' words directly from the text and putting them in here. I rewrote them to try and put it in my own style. One thing I wanted to note about this is that last moment where it's like she walks back to the microphone and unfolds the slip of paper. She reads out the name. It's Primrose Everdeen. There are a lot of moments like that throughout the story where Katniss will say something that someone does instead of just having the person do it on the page. This is something that I really started to pick up on when I started reading this story in tandem with the newer rewrite from 2014/16, because I realized that a lot of times in that newer version, in those same moments, I'll just have the character say it. And it makes me wonder why I didn't do that here, because it's a matter of like show don't tell, where sometimes having the character just say something, it's faster than having Katniss be like, she said this, this, and this, you know? Literally, Effie could have just walked up and been like, Primrose Everdeen. Like, I don't understand why Kat had to say it, but I'm assuming it was like that in the book. But I'm not sure. I haven't read The Hunger Games since I first read it, which was back in 2012, I think, actually. So it's been a sexy, like 7 years since I've looked at that book. So I don't remember everything except the general events. But anyway, let's go on to chapter 2. And I think this is all we're going to be able to read for this episode. Man, these chapters are long. I feel like someone has punched me in the gut. Like I can't breathe. I can feel the eyes of my peers on me. One of the girls has me by the arm. Was she catching me or comforting me? I can't tell. Yeah, neither can I, because it doesn't say that she stumbled backwards or anything. We don't have any kind of idea of what she's doing right now, except that she feels like she's been punched in the gut. The adults are muttering under their breath behind us. They hate when a 12-year-old gets chosen. They don't think it's fair. I don't understand how this happened. The odds were in her favor. She was 1 in hundreds. There are girls that have their names in over 50 times, but Prim's name was pulled instead. It makes no sense. So that paragraph highlights what I'm talking about when I say, like, reading the book as a quote-unquote guideline led to me copying a lot of things from Suzanne, even if it wasn't exactly in the same words. That chapter, I was thinking, like, to myself reading it, like, this does a good job of setting up the conflict coming in the next chapter. The chapter goes on, talking about the different ways that you can have your name put into the drawing more times than one. And then Kat deliberately says, I didn't let Prim take any tesserae, so she has one slip. It's her first year. And then she gets chosen anyway, so you're like, what? But that's all lifted directly from the book. It's not like any kind of building that I did on my own, you know? So is it really something that I did? No. But anyway. I can see her walking to the stage, her hands balled up at her sides. She looks stiff, like she's in shock. Like me. Prim! I yell out to her. I start moving towards her, and the other girls move out of my way. The peacekeepers are coming to me, but I can't stop. I get to the space that separates the boys and the girls, and the peacekeepers are on me now, grabbing my arms, trying to hold me back. Prim's almost to the stage when I shout out, I volunteer! I volunteer as tribute. They let go of my arms. Everyone is looking at me now. No one has volunteered in years. No one goes to the arena on their own will. Prim turns around and runs toward me, slamming into me and wrapping her arms around me. She's screaming my name with tears streaming down her face. You can't go, Katniss, she's saying. You can't go. I'm holding back tears as I tell her to go back in the crowd, to go find our mother. Gail comes and takes her away. I can still hear her crying when I reach the stage. Effie's got a manic smile on her face as I ascend the stairs. She grabs my arm and guides me to the microphone in the middle. I can see Mayor Undersea out of the corner of my eye, and he looks pained. She grabs it and sounds even more excited. She grabs the microphone. Our first ever volunteer! Tell us your name, dear. Katniss Everdeen. I try not to let my voice break. I bet my buttons that was your sister, she says. She actually sounds impressed. Familial love only extends so far, usually. Well, let's get a round of applause for our female tribute. The entire crowd stands there, silent. Then I see Madge raise the middle 3 fingers of her right hand to her lips, then to the sky. Soon the whole crowd follows. It's an old gesture sometimes done at funerals. It means thank you and goodbye. I'm shaking now, trying to hold back the tears, but Effie bounces back to the microphone now. How exciting! But we're not done yet. We still have to choose our male tribute. She moves to the second glass container and plunges her hand in. She's back in the middle of the stage reading the name quick as lightning. Peter Malak. I've never spoken to him, but I know the name. Peter. I watch him as he comes toward the stage. He's my height, stocky, with the gold hair and tan skin of the merchant class. His expression makes him look lost, but he doesn't stumble when he climbs the stairs. Effie asks for volunteers this time. I know he has brothers, but they won't do it. I'm a special case. After this, the mayor stands and reads the Treaty of Treason. I'm not listening, though. I'm thinking about the one time I've met Peeta. My father died when I was 11. The government gave us a bit of money, enough to get us through a month of grieving, and then my mother was meant to get a job, but she didn't. It was like she wasn't there at all. She stayed in bed all day, staring at the wall, and hardly ate. I tried to take over the best that I could, but I didn't know much then. But this was after the money had run out. Winter came that year, and it brought cold and rain. Oh, I never realized that typo was there. So while I'm here, see, note that she says winter came that year because this is Planetos, which is what fans call the planet that A Song of Ice and Fire takes place on. And, of course, they have those uneven seasons. So that's like a nice little mention. The references to A Song of Ice and Fire and the fact that it takes place on the same planet range between things like this that are kind of subtle and nicely done to much more obvious and clunky things that we will see later. I was in the alley behind the shops in the square looking for scraps, soaked to the bone. I wasn't old enough to get tesserae yet, and I had nothing to keep us until then. I had reached the bakery and tried to move the top of the trash can as quietly as possible, but the baker's wife saw me. She yelled at me out the door, saying that she'd had about enough of people digging through her trash, and that she would call the peacekeepers if I didn't go. I ran under a nearby tree and slid to the ground under the weight of my defeat. We were going to starve, I was sure. I couldn't bring myself to go home and face Prim. There was a door slam, and then I heard her again. She was yelling at a boy this time, her son, holding 2 burned pieces of bread. She told him he was an idiot and that no one buys burned bread, so he might as well throw it to the pig. He started to the pig pen, and I could make out a large red mark on his face. He looked at me as he threw the burnt corners in the pen, and then he threw the loaves to me. I grabbed them and ran before his mother could see me. I saw him at school the next day, sporting a big purple bruise where the red mark was, looking at me across the schoolyard. He didn't say a thing, and neither did I. But as I was leaving with Prim, I saw a dandelion peeking out of the crack in the pavement. It reminded me of my father, and for some reason, of PETA. I took it as a sign that we were going to make it. The mayor finishes reading and Effie tells us to shake hands. I wish that I had thanked him back then, but I was an awkward preteen who didn't talk to anybody. I could do it now, whisper in his ear as he grabs my hand, but I don't. There are cameras and microphones. This is none of their business. His hand is warm, and he has a solid grip. He squeezes my hand before he lets go. I can't tell if it's meant to comfort me or not. He squeezes my hand before he lets go. I can't tell. That's one sentence separated by a comma. I don't know why. It should be a semicolon, if anything, but a period would be fine there too. Effie thanks the crowd and wishes them a happy Hunger Games again as peacekeepers take PETA and I into the Justice Building. They place me in a room by myself and close the door. Maybe I'll get to thank him before the games. We'll be too busy running for our lives in the arena. I don't know if I want my last words to be, "Thanks for not watching me starve, PETA." And that's the end of that chapter. That one's fine, too. Yeah. Overall, if I'm remembering correctly, this story tends to, it has problems, but the writing isn't always one of them. It's definitely readable. And I think part of that comes from the fact that I am paraphrasing from the book here. So that kind of keeps some of my inhibitions in check. Whereas other stories I was allowed to run amok because I wasn't using a source material that much. So it was kind of wild. But yeah, so both of those chapters were fine. The chapter we just read is fine. I think for what it is, it works. We get across an important backstory thing. We learn about how weird it is that Katniss is doing this, and it says a lot about her relationship with her sister, blah, blah, blah. It does what it needs to do, you know? It's not anything special, but it works. So like I said, we are going to end there because, again, these chapters are really long. And for some reason, because of the typeface I chose to write this with, I feel like I'm reading a lot more slowly than I usually do. So yeah, here we are. We're starting this journey. I hope you guys enjoy. I'm hoping the story picks up a little bit in later chapters when more stuff starts to happen. I can't say stuff because stuff is happening. One thing that I will say that I do remember is that my actual inserts into the story don't start to pick up until a little bit later. Right now, none of the changes are actual changes that affect the story very heavily. But as we get closer to the games, that stuff is going to start to come up. So I'm looking forward to talking more about that kind of stuff. My hope is that the story just stays decent enough that we can get to that without any kind of incident. And by incident, I mean me wanting to rip my hair out because I'm bored or anything. So yeah, if you like this video, like it on the YouTubes, subscribe to the channel so that you can know when the next part comes out, and then eventually when I upload the next series after we're done this, you'll know about that too. You can also watch other videos that I have on my channel. I do have some other stuff on there that I think is really cool that you might like. And I will see you for the next episode where we start with chapter 3. Bye!